Imagine dropping a $1 billion factory into a totally new country,
Right.
and you just expect to, I don't know, hit print on your global corporate HR manual.
Yeah, you assume it'll be that easy.
Exactly. You take your standard operating procedures, your global data policies, your employment contracts, and you just assume they will effortlessly cross borders. But suddenly, the print button is jammed.
Jammed completely.
And that is exactly the reality of doing business in Vietnam right now.
It really is. I mean, it is this hypercharged environment. We are looking at a developing market that is rapidly redefining the rules of engagement.
Just totally rewriting them.
Right, to attract massive foreign investment, but, doing it on its own terms and at lightning speed.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because whether you are managing a global tech team remotely or prepping for a major market entry.
Or maybe you're just insanely curious about the mechanics of global economics.
Yes, because what is happening in Vietnam is basically a masterclass in how international trade fundamentally shifts power dynamics.
It really is a masterclass.
So for this deep dive, we are pulling from two incredibly dense authoritative sources. First, we have a comprehensive legal practice guide from Deline Legal.
Which is a top-ranked boutique business law firm in Vietnam. They handle massive, complex corporate transactions.
Exactly. And second, we are digging into the official VCCI HCM guidebook on implementing Vietnam's Labor Code 2019.
And our mission today is really to extract the crucial, actionable insights from these texts. Because, when you read through the dry legal text of a labor code,
Oh, and it is very dry.
right, or a corporate firm's practice area guide, what you're actually looking at is the architecture of a changing economy.
I like that, the architecture.
Yeah, you're seeing the actual machinery of how a country balances the aggressive need for foreign direct investment with the absolute necessity of, modernizing its workforce protections.
So let's start right at the foundation of any business. Hiring.
The absolute core.
We're going to zoom in from that macro view of foreign investment down to the micro level of what it actually means to be an employee in Vietnam today.
Because the Labor Code 2019 completely dismantled the old definition.
Completely. It used to be that you were an employee if you had a piece of paper that explicitly said labor contract right at the top.
Right, it was all about the label. But now, the law looks entirely at the substance of the relationship. It completely ignores whatever label you slapped on it.
Wow.
Under the new code, if there's an agreement to work, if a salary or wage is paid, and if one party is managing, directing, or supervising the other,
Then boom, an employment relationship exists.
exactly, it falls strictly under labor law.
Wait, let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
If I'm an employer and I hire someone to do some design work and I explicitly write freelance contractor or like service agreement at the top of the PDF,
Right.
but I tell them what time to log on and what to do, the local court just crosses out my title. I mean, isn't that a massive overreach by the state into private business contracts?
Well, it brings us right into the duck test.
Yeah. Oh, the duck test. If it walks like an employee, quacks like an employee, and is managed like an employee.
Is an
Ugh.
employee, even if you slap freelancer on the paperwork.
Wow.
It might feel like overreach to a traditional manager, but if we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see exactly what the lawmakers are doing.
Closing loopholes.
Exactly. They are deliberately targeting the loopholes that companies, especially in the gig economy or project-based sectors, rely on.
Right, to avoid paying benefits or mandatory social insurance.
Precisely. By making the definition of an employee so expansive and substance-based, Vietnam is creating a much more transparent environment.
And I imagine transparency is exactly what massive foreign investors are actually demanding, right?
Absolutely. When a firm like Dillon Legal is structuring a billion-dollar joint venture for a multinational client,
Right.
those clients need highly predictable liabilities. They cannot afford to acquire a company that relies on a massive shadow workforce.
Oh, wow. Yeah, imagine acquiring a startup and then a local labor authority suddenly reclassifies 500 freelancers as full-time employees.
And suddenly you owe years of back taxes and insurance.
That would be a nightmare.
So substance over form removes that hidden risk.
Okay, predictability. So once we've established who is actually an employee, we have to look at the contracts themselves, which, based on the sources, have also been severely streamlined.
Very much so. The whole concept of seasonal contracts is gone.
Just totally gone.
Yes. The old code allowed for seasonal or specific task contracts of less than 12 months. Those are entirely eliminated.
Wow.
Now, an employer only has two options to offer: an indefinite term contract or a definite term contract, which is strictly capped at 36 months.
And crucially, you can no longer use a simple contract appendix to magically extend the term of a labor contract.
Precisely.
Meaning you can't just slap a writer onto the original document that says, hey, we're extending this for another year.
Right. The law forces a decision point. Once that definite term is up, you generally get to offer one more definite term.
Okay.
After that second term expires, if that person is still working for you, the law automatically converts it to an indefinite term contract.
So the era of keeping a worker on perpetual probation or endless short-term renewals to avoid commitment that's effectively over.
It is.
Speaking of probation, though, this is an area where the law seems to acknowledge that not all employees are created equal. The rules have totally bifurcated based on the seniority of the role.
It is an incredibly practical change. For your standard employee, the probationary period remains short, usually 30 to 60 days, depending on the technical skill required.
Right.
But if you're hiring a corporate manager, we were talking about the CEO, general director, the people steering the ship probation can now be set for up to 180 days.
6 months of probation, which, if you think about it, makes total sense for the reality of executive recruitment.
It does.
60 days is barely enough time for a new CEO to figure out where the bathrooms are, let alone evaluate their strategic vision or their impact on the bottom line.
True. But the law balances that flexibility with a very strict boundary. It prohibits an employer from making an employee pass multiple probationary periods for the same job.
Oh, interesting.
You get one shot,
Yeah.
you evaluate them for the allotted time, and then you either commit to a labor contract or you let them go. You cannot string them along with back-to-back probation periods.
Okay, so the rules for getting hired and establishing the contract have become heavily regulated, substance-based, and transparent.
Yes.
But if we pivot from the beginning of the relationship to the end, the rules for getting fired or quitting have seen what I can only describe as an absolute revolution.
A total overhaul.
Let's look at how a contract ends, because the power dynamic here has violently shifted. Under the old laws, if you were on a definite term contract, you couldn't just walk into your boss's office and say, I quit.
Right. You needed a specific, legally recognized justification.
Like what?
Things like documenting personal or family difficulties or proving you were not being assigned the agreed-upon work. It placed a significant burden of proof on the employee just to leave their job.
It created immense friction.
Exactly.
But under the Labor Code 2019, that friction is gone. You can unilaterally terminate practically any contract just by running out the clock on a notice period.
No reason required.
You want to leave. Fine. Just give 45 days notice for an indefinite contract, 30 days for a definite contract of a year or more, or just 3 days if you've been there under 12 months.
And the law goes even further to protect the worker in hostile environments.
Ah, the zero notice rules.
Yes, there are now specific situations where an employee can walk away with 0 days of notice.
Wow.
If they aren't paid in full or on time, if they were abused or forced to work,
Right.
or, and this connects back to the transparency of the hiring phase we just discussed,
Right.
if the employer provided untruthful information during recruitment that affects the job, the employee can quit immediately.
Wait, stop right there, because this is where my alarm bells ring if I'm a business owner.
I can imagine.
If an employee can quit for practically any reason now, just by giving standard notice, or even walk out with zero notice if they simply claim the recruiter gave them untruthful info, doesn't that massively shift the leverage to the worker?
It does.
Especially if you are operating in a tight labor market where skilled manufacturing engineers or tech talent are highly sought after.
It absolutely shifts the leverage, but that is a deliberate feature of the new code, not a bug.
Interesting.
Vietnam is actively signaling to the global market that it is no longer just a source of cheap, disposable labor. To attract high-value industries like advanced electronics manufacturing or software development, they know they need a modern, stable, and protected workforce.
That makes a lot of sense.
But I should point out, this shift in leverage isn't entirely one-sided. Employers also gained a very sharp new tool for their own protection.
The ghosting rule.
Yes. If an employee ghosts them, literally just does not show up for 5 consecutive working days without a legitimate, legally acceptable reason.
The employer can unilaterally terminate them without any prior notice.
Exactly.
That is huge for factory managers or HR directors. I can imagine the old system required them to go through a massive, drawn-out, bureaucratic disciplinary process.
Oh, absolutely. Sending registered letters to an empty apartment just to get someone off the payroll who had clearly abandoned their job weeks ago.
So it cleans up a massive administrative burden.
It does. But returning to how the workplace is modernizing to protect workers, the new code makes a landmark update regarding sexual harassment.
That stood out to me, too.
For the first time, sexual harassment is explicitly defined in the law, and it is grounds for immediate dismissal of the offender.
And reading the VCCI guidebook, their definition of the workplace is aggressively expanded. It's not just the physical office building or the factory floor anymore.
Not at all.
The workplace now includes online communications, social activities, work trips, company parties, even the vehicle provided by the employer to commute.
Yes.
If it's a WhatsApp group dedicated to the marketing team and harassment happens there at 10 p.m. on a Saturday, legally, that is the workplace.
This is a perfect example of international standards bleeding into local laws.
Right.
This modernization isn't happening in a vacuum.
Right.
It's a direct reflection of ILO Convention 19980, the International Labor Organization's Convention on Ending Violence and Harassment in the Workplace.
So Vietnam is internalizing these global standards to ensure they remain a top-tier destination for multinational corporations.
Exactly. Those global companies have strict ESG, environmental, social, and governance mandates from their own shareholders. They simply cannot operate in a country where basic modern protections aren't codified into law.
So we have global trade agreements essentially acting as a catalyst for local workplace democratization.
That's a great way to put it.
And that brings us to arguably the most groundbreaking shift in this entire stack of sources. We've talked about how individual power dynamics have shifted between an employee and a boss. But what happens when workers join forces?
This is where things get really interesting.
Historically, if you worked in Vietnam and you wanted to be in a union, there was only one option: the state-run trade union.
Right. But the Labor Code 2019 introduces a profound structural change: the creation of independent employee organizations in the enterprise, or EOIEs.
EOIEs.
This is monumental. The law now allows employees to establish and join grassroots organizations that operate independently of the state-run trade union system to represent their interests.
And the legal firewall built around these new independent unions is incredibly rigid. Employers are strictly prohibited from intervening in their establishment.
And prohibited.
You can't offer financial bribes to their leaders, you can't manipulate their internal elections, and you certainly cannot discriminate against employees who join them.
Right. An employer can't fire someone or conveniently decide not to renew their 36-month definite contract just because they started a grassroots union.
What's fascinating here is the mechanism driving this change.
Yes.
This wasn't just a sudden, random local policy update. This structural shift was a direct prerequisite for Vietnam joining massive global free trade agreements.
Exactly. When Vietnam signed on to the CPTPP, the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, and the EVFTA with the European Union, they committed to upholding core international labor organization standards regarding freedom of association.
So global trade is literally forcing grassroots democratization onto the factory floor. It is like a corporate immune system response to global trade pressure.
That's exactly what it is.
If you want the billions in zero-tariff exports to Europe, you have to let your workers organize independently. But again, put yourself in the shoes of a business owner.
Oh, it's daunting.
If I'm looking at the Dillon Legal Guide, they advise multinational manufacturers. One client mentioned has over 5,000 workers and exports $100 million annually.
Massive operations.
Right. If I am the general manager of that plant and suddenly I have to negotiate with multiple competing independent unions instead of just one unified state-run entity, doesn't that make running a business incredibly chaotic?
It undeniably introduces a staggering level of complexity. The VCCI guidebook explicitly details how heavily regulated workplace dialogues have become in this new environment.
Right. It's not just an informal town hall or a suggestion box anymore.
Not at all. If a company wants to change pay scales, issue internal labor rules, or retrench workers due to economic conditions, they are legally mandated to hold formal dialogues.
What does that actually look like in practice?
Well, the guidebook spells out strict quotas based on the size of your workforce.
Okay.
If you have a company of under 50 employees, you're required to have at least 3 union representatives at the table.
That seems manageable.
But if you are that massive manufacturer with over 1,000 employees, you're legally required to have 24 or more worker representatives involved in the dialogue.
Wow. 24 reps.
At least. And you must consult the specific independent union that the affected employee belongs to.
Just visualizing the logistics of that is dizzying. If you are listening to this, imagine you manage a large tech hardware facility and you need to do a mass layoff because you are bringing in new automated robotics.
It's a huge
You
process.
can't just hand out pink slips. You have to develop a formal labor utilization plan, consult with potentially multiple different unions, hold heavily documented dialogues, and notify the provincial government 30 days in advance.
The procedural tightrope you have to walk is razor thin,
And the penalties for slipping off that tightrope are severe.
very severe. If you misstep, say, you unilaterally fire someone illegally because you skipped a procedural step in the dialogue process, the courts can force you to physically reinstate that employee
Wow.
and pay all their back wages for the time they're gone, plus a penalty of at least 2 months' salary.
So we have global trade agreements forcing local factories to democratize and placing massive compliance burdens on local management. But it's not a one-way street. Local Vietnamese regulators are also forcing their way into the global boardrooms of these multinational companies.
This is a huge point.
This is where we transition from labor law into the much broader, high-stakes compliance environment outlined by Dillon Legal, because these boutique law firms aren't just filing standard incorporation papers anymore.
No, they are operating as survival guides for existential enterprise-level threats.
Exactly. When you look beyond labor, you see multinationals scrambling to comply with an entirely new matrix of regulations. Take Vietnam's Decree 13 regarding data privacy.
Yes, data privacy.
If you're listening to this and thinking, I run a software company, I don't build factories with thousands of union workers, how does this apply to me?
It applies directly to you.
Decree 13 targets you directly. This is where global tech infrastructure crashes into local sovereignty. The sources show companies leading American tech firms, German industrial giants, having to completely adapt their global privacy architectures to Vietnam's specific rules.
And the mechanism for compliance here is incredibly intrusive. Under Decree 13, you can't just route your Vietnamese employees' HR data or your local customers' profiles back to a centralized server in Chicago or Berlin anymore.
Wait, really?
Yeah. You have to submit what is called an Overseas Transfer Impact Assessment, or OTIA.
You literally have to prove to the Ministry of Public Security in Vietnam that your global server in Chicago meets Vietnamese security standards.
Exactly.
You are essentially opening up your proprietary global IT architecture to local regulators for approval before you can move your own data across borders.
And that level of regulatory friction extends to physical assets as well.
Yeah.
Consider the Land Law of 2024.
Oh, right.
The rules are fundamentally changing how foreign developers handle massive projects. We are talking about 10-figure mixed-use real estate developments and the acquisition of massive industrial zones.
10-figure deals. The stakes are just astronomical.
Securing land use rights, navigating the changing valuation methods, and structuring joint ventures with local partners requires navigating a labyrinth that involves multiple government ministries. And each of them has their own interpretation of the new rules.
And the stakes of navigating that labyrinth incorrectly aren't just a slap on the wrist. The sheer financial and reputational stakes are staggering.
Absolutely staggering.
The Dillon legal sources highlight exactly what happens when companies find themselves on the wrong side of this complex environment. They mention partner Di Huang handling the Formosa marine pollution incident.
A huge case.
For context, this was a landmark environmental crisis in Vietnam involving a massive steel plant that caused unprecedented marine life die-offs.
Right.
The regulatory fallout, the public relations nightmare, the compensation negotiations it required navigating a crisis that threatened the very existence of the investment.
And the financial scrutiny is just as intense as the environmental. The sources also mentioned advising a Taiwanese manufacturer again, one with 5,000 workers, through a 10-year tax audit.
Just thinking about the stress of a 10-year tax audit makes my blood pressure spike.
I know, right? Imagine the paperwork.
Imagine the changes in local tax regimes over a decade being retroactively analyzed. It requires a legal defense team that doesn't just know the letter of the law, but understands the unwritten temperature of the regulatory environment and how those laws were applied 10 years ago versus today.
And when those massive disputes cannot be resolved through audits or regulatory negotiations, they escalate.
Right.
The sources point out Michael Lee, another partner, chairing a 9-digit US dollar arbitration at the Vietnam International Arbitration Center, or VIAC.
9 digits. Hundreds of millions of dollars on the line. And there is a specific reason why these massive multinational disputes often end up in arbitration centers like VIAC rather than local provincial courts, right?
Yes, arbitration offers a bridge. Multinational investors need a venue that understands international corporate standards.
Right.
But the outcome still has to be enforceable within local Vietnamese realities. When you have hundreds of millions of dollars at stake, you cannot rely on a generic legal template.
You really can't.
You need boutique advisors who have deep relationships with state regulators but speak the language of global capital.
So we have traced an incredible thread today. We started at the most granular level, a single employment contract, applying the duck test to see who actually qualifies as a worker when a country demands transparency.
Right.
We looked at how notice periods and strict firing rules have violently shifted leverage toward the employee.
A massive shift.
We witnessed the birth of independent grassroots unions on the factory floor, which is basically a corporate immune response driven by global trade deals like the CPTPP.
Exactly.
And we followed that thread all the way up into the boardrooms, looking at how local regulators are demanding access to global data servers and how missteps lead to environmental crises and 9-digit corporate arbitrations.
What the Dillon Legal Guide and the VCCI Labor Code Handbook ultimately reveal is that Vietnam is serving as a real-time masterclass in modernization.
It really is.
It is a country aggressively meeting the demands of global capitalism, while simultaneously building massive legal frameworks to protect its own sovereignty, its land, its data, and its citizens. It is a balancing act of epic proportions.
It really shatters that idea we started with, that you can just drop a business into a new country, hit print on your standard operating procedures, and expect it to work.
It definitely shatters that.
The rulebook isn't static, it is alive, it is breathing, and it is being aggressively rewritten, which leaves you, the listener, with a final thought to chew on.
Oh, this is a good one.
We've seen today how massive global treaties can effectively force a sovereign country to rewrite its internal labor laws and allow independent unions. As international trade continues to force countries all over the world to harmonize their laws to satisfy global investors, what happens to unique local business cultures? Are we inevitably moving toward a single, standardized global corporate rulebook? And if we are, who is really holding the pen?